Good morning, everyone. Good morning, or depending where you are, maybe it's good afternoon, or good evening, or good middle of the night. So wherever you are, welcome along to class number 7 of our Bodhi Tree Buddhism Communities series on Karma and Insight Study and Meditation. So I'm sure probably many of you that are tuning in to our Facebook live stream are our regular participants in the class. So it's good to see you all. If anyone out there is new, welcome along as well. And I'm happy that you can join us today. So we already see, well, online we've got a couple of keen people already. We've got Margot, you've been very dedicated. We've got Nathaniel there, good to see you, Nathaniel. I hope you're all doing well wherever you are. Of course, I feel like, our whole course has been taking place during the time of this coronavirus. And I'm kind of, in some ways, like, it's sort of, I think, probably always on almost everyone's minds and regular topic of conversation. I kind of haven't talked about it too much. I've kind of mentioned it a bit. I'm kind of thinking perhaps that maybe in some ways having the class is a bit of a kind of a break from that, and then rather than sort of worrying about that and what's going on, it's a bit of time to kind of reflect within and reflect on ourselves, our own actions, our own state of mind. But still, it's kind of like always there in the background. And in addition, okay, I see we've got Terry who's joined us there online as well from the Philippines. Good to see you all, and the rest of the the Kalyana Mitra meditation group that you've got there. I'm glad that you've been with us for our little class journey so far. So what was I saying? So yeah, about the virus. So in addition to that, like in the last couple of days here in Taiwan, we've had some like really big heavy rains as well. It's not actually the end of that typhoon that went past. It's just some crazy like really wet cold front that's just like sitting over the country and not moving. It's mostly down south, and they're already having some flooding down there after getting, like 300, 400, 500 plus mils of rain in the last day or two. It's been raining pretty heavy up here, but it's not too much. But apparently this is going to continue for a while longer. I'm mentioning this mainly for the reason that if in the middle of the class it sounds like there's a lot of like static in the background and the sound quality isn't very good, it could possibly be due to just the rain, just the sound of the rain, and not our the audio recording and the mics here. So maybe that's kind of the situation. I'm assuming kind of everything is coming through clearly on the live stream. If it's not, just let me know in the comments there. I had a bit of a weird problem with setup this morning with the camera and getting the camera angles, but I think we're kind of okay to go now. So wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. As I was saying, so about the coronavirus, it's kind of been a bit weird, Like as I said, being in Taiwan, it's been a bit different because I think Taiwan had a very early response, and being so close to China, where it began, a very early response, and people very quickly sort of it becoming something that people were alert to. But at the same time, here, just really in the last few weeks, there haven't been any cases at all. So it's sort of been, I think people are feeling far less concerned about it. It's still definitely like on people's minds, and there's still some like restrictions in place for particularly like face masks and social distancing. But I think even for the rest of the world, it seems a lot of places are maybe kind of getting used to it, and then people's behaviour is starting to be a bit more like, oh well, maybe it's not such an issue. But I think looking at statistics about like number of cases and growth and development in a lot of countries, it really hasn't slowed down that much, or it slowed down like a tiny bit, and then people are like, oh, it slowed down a tiny bit, and they think like it's just going to continue in that way, but then their actions are just going to lead to a case where it's going to come back again. So wherever you are, you're probably used to it, and probably the restrictions are a bit of a challenge in life. But I think we've really got to just got to stick in there. So what better thing to do than self-isolate yourself in the privacy of your own home or wherever. I'm just going to move the camera a bit. And find a comfy seat with some Wi-Fi or a plug-in internet connection and join a meditation class. The best option. Okay, it's the best option. Unless, of course, you want to do it in a group. But even if you want to do it in a group, we can all do it in our separate places. We're kind of having a bit of interaction together, but then at the same time, we're also doing something that's going to be much safer for our health. Okay, that's enough of other topics out there in the world for these last very trying few weeks, few months. So let's get into our material for today. Okay, so what are we looking at today? So we've been going through kind of chapter by chapter through our text, as you know very well. We went through chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then for chapter 4, of course, we did like 3 weeks. So we kind of like we class 1, 2, 3, and then for chapter 4 we did 1, 2, 3 weeks. So that was up to class 6 last week. So this week's week 7. We've only got one more class to go, which is next week. So, but we're not going to look at chapter 5. Chapter 5 is very kind of short and sweet. In Chinese, it's called what is it? Fangbian. So it's looking at a couple of 5 kind of, you can't really say techniques, but they're actually very similar to the Buddhist teachings on the 5 faculties, which is sort of like, having faith and mindfulness, effort, concentration, and wisdom. And these are all things that we need to apply in balance during our meditation practice. Now, by in balance, it doesn't mean that they all have to be sort of totally equal amounts. Different people will have different strengths in different faculties, but we need to have all of them at least to some degree, and we'll probably also find that as individuals we'll have maybe 1 or 2 of those faculties which will be a bit stronger, and they will then kind of lead the way in which we undertake our practice. So, for example, and this is in a sort of a very similar way but slightly different setting, the Buddha often described kind of what we might call the temperament or the kind of personality type of practitioners. Now, there's a couple of different systems. The simplest one, it just basically says 2 types of practitioners. There are those, first one's called Shraddhanusari, so it means those who follow by faith, and the second time is Dhammanusari, which is those who follow by Dharma, which means, and it kind of means those who follow by wisdom. So there are certain practitioners whose basic practice is really driven by this very strong faith, belief, faith in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, or faith in their teacher or their particular method. And you kind of know these sorts of people. They can be, if it gets taken a bit too far, these people can be very much sort of like, like this is the only practice, or this is the only sutra you'll ever need. Now, it might work for them, of course, which is fine. And just that really strong conviction that that particular teaching or teacher just puts them on the path really strongly. They have no doubts, and they just kind of keep on going and advancing on their path. But the other type, those who follow by Dharma, or those who kind of follow by wisdom, we could call it, is a bit different. They won't just necessarily think like, oh, there's this particular teaching or this particular idea, or even like Buddhism as a whole, I believe in it, therefore, without any doubt, and they practice. They really want to kind of understand it. And they will kind of take a bit more time. They might be a little bit even more skeptical at first. They want a really good, clear explanation of these various things before they can really commit to it. So it might seem as though it's a bit more difficult for them to get into it because they don't have that kind of real strong fervour or faith. But of these two, well, first of all, of these 2 types, the first type, the faith follower, is definitely the most common kind of practitioner, and that's why like in Chinese we talk about Xintu, so it often gets translated as devotees. Most practitioners are devotees. Faith comes first. But the second type is a bit fewer, might be a bit more intellectual, but the Buddha did also say, like, ultimately actually it's that second type that will progress much deeper on the path, because we ultimately still need that wisdom. It's that wisdom that ultimately cuts through those afflictions in the first place. So that's like a kind of an important point to keep in mind. Now it's kind of also another, just a last side note about this topic. Sorry, we haven't even got into today's actual chapter yet. But talking about these two, sort of the majority as faith followers, and then a minority as followers by wisdom or by Dharma. It's worth pointing out that I think a lot of materials in the West about Buddhism, so by the West I mean outside of those traditional Buddhist cultures, and maybe there's a bit of an old idea, but it's still quite common, as kind of almost talking about Buddhism as though it was just whatever Christianity is, and then highlighting these differences and really exaggerating them, and sort of saying that Christianity is entirely about faith, and Buddhism, some people will say this, is not about faith at all. It's just all about wisdom or something. This idea, there's no place for faith in Buddhism. There's no place for belief in Buddhism. That is a surprisingly common comment that I hear all the time, and it's just not true. It's just simply not true. Not even in terms of, if you go out and you interact with Buddhist communities, there's a really core element of faith and belief. But it's also like embedded within the teachings. There's lots of times when the Buddha does teach that and encourage that. But the point is, it's a key point, like it doesn't end at faith either. Faith is not sufficient to end our path. Ultimately, we've also got to have that kind of insight as well. That's what cuts through the problems. But faith can be a really important factor in that, of keeping us on the path, keeping us determined in order to be able to apply that wisdom. So maybe we can see kind of the relationship a bit like this. Okay, so actually that was a bit kind of, wasn't going to be part of the class, but it's worth talking about and just kind of letting you know a couple of the key elements that are there in that chapter 5 of our text. So let's skip on in though and have a look at the chapter we're supposed to be looking at today. So what's that chapter we're looking at today? It's chapter 6. In Chinese it's called Zheng Xiu. The English translation here is the actual cultivation. Now, one thing you also will note about this chapter, I don't know, this might be a bit too small on your screen. Page numbers, there's like 20 pages in this file. It's quite a big chapter. It's quite a big chapter. I'm not sure if we want to try to hit it all today, or maybe we can split it up. It's actually got 2 parts in it. The first part is this one here, calming and insight during sitting meditation. And then the other part, I won't skip through, is basically like cultivating calm and insight when we are engaged in activities and when our senses are engaging with the world. All right, so these 2 parts to this chapter. So let's maybe at least try to work through the first one, and then depending on time we can decide whether or not we want to hit the second half or if we want to leave that until next week. Okay, so let's have a look at this first one. As it says here at the start of this chapter, as for the cultivation of calming and insight, there are 2 modes. The first is cultivation while sitting, the second is cultivation while moving through objective conditions and as one relates to the objective sphere. So objective conditions here means literally like objects of the senses. Objects of the senses. The things that we see and hear and smell and taste and touch while we are sitting, standing, walking, lying, while we are speaking, while we are doing things. So it's kind of got the quite active part. So you can look at it like some people like to talk about their practice in terms of like a formal sitting session, and then of course trying to maintain your practice while you go about your daily life. Okay, so let's have a look at this first one. As for the first mode, the cultivation, as one cultivates calming and insight while sitting, although it is true that this, so meaning calm and insight, can be accomplished in any of the 4 deportments, so sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. So deportments means your basic physical position. So in Buddhism they talk about 4 of them, right? So from standing, sitting, walking, and lying down, your 4 basic postures. Still, for the study of the path, sitting is the superior posture. And I talked a little bit about this, I think, maybe even in the first week, like the first class. Basically, the point being, Sitting enables the body to be calm and stable, so more calm and more stable than standing, and definitely walking. But you might say, well, what about lying? Lying is also very stable, so your body can relax. Yeah, but when we lie down, we also tend to sleep. So because the sitting posture is upright, it also keeps the mind alert and awake. So it's that perfect balance between these two, between stable and relaxed, but also awake and clear. So it gives then 5 different situations. These headings are added. So the first one, so they're all about cultivating calm and insight as a means to counteract coarseness and disorderedness. So just like a rough and scattered mind. Cultivating calm and insight to counteract these 2 problems of sinking and floating. We've already encountered those. Cultivating calm and insight in a manner which accords with whatever is appropriate. So we could say this is kind of like in accordance to your specific mental state. Cultivating calm and insight to counteract subtle states of mind that occur in meditative absorption, and in order to achieve a balance between absorption and wisdom. Okay, now there's a lot here. Like I said, there's a big chapter, so we're going to try to hit on a couple of the key points here. Okay, the first concept is cultivating calm and insight to counteract coarseness and disorderedness. It refers to the case where, because the practitioner's thoughts are coarse and disordered, when he or she first attempts to sit in dhyana, they should cultivate calming to get rid of them and break their hold. So you got rough, your mind's all scattered and thinking about this and thinking about that. So you first sit down, you first try to calm it, use some just basic method to calm it down. But if one is unable to break the hold through calmness, then one ought in such a case to cultivate insight. Now this is kind of an interesting point that shows that while we talk about calm and insight, 2 terms, same as like samadhi and prajna, for example, but we can't really just totally separate these 2 terms out from one another. Okay, we can't just totally separate these 2 ideas out from one another. And you will actually see this throughout this chapter. We might normally think, well, the first you go into meditation, your mind's very rough, right? And by rough, it just means, whereas you want your mind to settle and focus on one thing, and it just won't do it. It's got thoughts going, and these are like full developed thoughts with different emotions and whatever. They're not just kind of already partly broken down, distracted thoughts popping up. It's like full-on thought stream. So you think, well, in that case, what you do, okay, mind's not focused, not calm, therefore you practice calm to do it. But sometimes it's so rough that, the idea of practicing calm is that you focus in your mind on one thing for long enough to break down the other thoughts. But then what if it's just so rough that it can't focus on one thing, right? If you're still in that kind of like mental chatter mode where you're thinking with thoughts and concepts, so like that's a difficult position, and you might find yourself in that case sometimes. Like your mind is just so rough and distracted, you try to sit down and focus on your breath, for example, you just can't do it. So what do you do in that case? So here they say, well, you might actually then want to flip to practicing your insight practice. So if your mind is already on that like chatter mode, it's thinking with words and concepts, okay, use that. But what you do then is you use those words and concepts to deal with different types of thoughts that you got. So let's say you are, you've got some important deadline coming up at work, for example, some project that's due. So in my case, like, maybe it's the end of semester exams, and I need to write exams, and I'm going to need to mark papers, and I need to have them in by a certain date. So it's very much on my mind. Got students coming in, true case, students calling me up like about an hour before the deadline to withdraw from a class, and I'm not even on campus. Okay, so it's like, you think about all these things. So in that case, I like to just focus on my breath and calm down. I can't. So then I can think, okay, if I'm in a thinking mode, I can think about these things. Okay, I've got these deadlines due, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So I need to reflect on these deadlines. These deadlines are impermanent, right? It's a conditioned thing. It depends on different causes and conditions. Some of those causes and conditions are factors and things that I can influence. A lot of them aren't. Some of them just simply aren't. It's also dissatisfactory. You know, even if I do this great project and I succeed and I get pats on the back, but ultimately that satisfaction is not going to last. I'll still find parts that I'm not satisfied with, and after a short amount of time I will have forgotten about it, and then I'll just be simply setting my sights on some new target. So I need to think then, like, my mind obsessing about this thing is obsessing about it as though it's the most important thing in the world. I need to recognize it's not. Right? It's not the most important thing in the world. So, you know, you can do this through all these different contemplations, reflect on it. It's ultimately dissatisfactory. It's also impermanent. You can do something a little bit more abrupt and say, like, what if I was to die? You know, life is short. What if I was to die before that even happened and before the due date? Do I want to die with the last thing on my mind being that project just to make my boss happy? I mean, make myself happy as well. It's not just for my boss. No. I also need to be able to let go of those things and be able to bring my mind back to a clear state. You can also think about it in a slightly different way, not quite insight per se, but to reflect that, like, if I want to do this job well, I actually need a clear and calm mind. If I'm engaged kind of a bit over the top, actually it will reduce my ability to perform and do the job properly because my mind is so stressed about it. It's actually good for me to calm the mind and be clear, at least just for a short time. So when I engage in it, I can engage in it properly and with clarity. So these are the contemplations, right? First, your mind was thinking about all these things. Oh, I need to do this. I need to contact this person. I need to get this in at this time. It's using thoughts and language to think about that thing, but it's not bringing about, it's just bringing about stress, basically. So then I use thoughts and language to reflect on it in a sort of a very coarse style inside, right? By reflecting on it. This thing is impermanent, it's dissatisfactory. It's not self, it's out of, you know, it's not entirely under my control because it's dependent on different circumstances. Thinking about it in this way will then help to, okay, I can put the job down now. When I'm at work, I can work. Now that I'm not at work, I need to be able to relax and chill out. Okay, by thinking about it like that for a while, you might be able to knock down those really coarse, persistent states of mind enough that then I can flip back to doing my calming practice. Maybe it's my breath and mindfulness in my body or something like that. Okay. Now that kind of principle is actually seen throughout this chapter here. So that's one case there, dealing with coarseness and disordered state of mind. The next one goes on to then, and then it talks about how to do this during sitting meditation. Okay, that's the next phase here. So calming by anchoring attention on an object in the objective sphere. So the first of these is calming, whereby one anchors one's attention on a particular condition. So when he's talking about condition here, it's this translation of, it's like an object or a point of focus. So when we say anchor your attention on a particular condition, in my words, I'd probably say fix your focus on a particular object. Okay. So one example might be anchoring the mind at locations like the tip of the nose or at the navel to prevent the mind from becoming scattered. Okay, now we talked about that last week, remember? You remember what we talked about? Why have two different places, one on the nose, one down at the navel below the lower abdomen? Why? So remember that was also related to like sinking and floating. So when the mind is floating, it's kind of very floaty and bouncing around different ideas and whatever, putting it low in the body will help to calm it down. But then if your energy is a bit too low and dull, then lifting it up will actually bring about a bit of clarity. You've got to make sure you get that the right way around, because if the mind is floating and you bring the energy high, your point of focus fly high, it might actually just create more of that kind of effect, and vice versa, to make the mind too dull. The second one is just literally through controlling the mind. So it refers to exerting control no matter what comes up in mind in order to prevent it running off and becoming scattered. So just like, it's a bit more forcible. When your mind starts to head off, just like, stop, no, bring it back. Now, some people really, this really doesn't work for some people. I will say in my experience, often this is a little bit like, it's a little bit different, but it's also a little bit like this idea that some people have meditation where they sort of say, don't think of anything. And then, of course, the idea of don't think of anything is actually thinking of something, and it just kind of creates more of a problem. So some people do find this difficult, though some people can do it. And then the last one, calming through realization of truth. This is actually, again, a lot like the idea of calming through insight. You can use insight and contemplation in order to calm the mind. Now, what it means here by truth is a little bit abstract, and it is getting a little bit into kind of high-end Mahayana and Tiantai philosophy, but let's just have a little look at it. The third is calming through realization of truth. This means that no matter what the mind dwells upon, if one understands that all dharmas, so this all like phenomena, all the things that are going on in your mind, are produced from causes and conditions and are devoid of an inherently existent nature, then the mind will not seize upon them. So we're thinking about things, and we think about things and grasp at things as if they were really solidly real, actual things. Largely they are not. They don't have a nature in and of themselves. They exist due to different causes and conditions, and one of those causes and conditions is, of course, our own conceptualization of this. So a lot of the things that we get caught up in are the ways in which we create those things. So much of our life is dealing with simple creations of human nature and human society. By seeing them for what they are, we realize they are actually kind of like insubstantial. And when you see that, you don't attach them, you don't cling to them, and by not clinging, then the mind becomes calm. So again, we can see that the insight can lead to a state of calmness, just as bringing about a state of calmness can aid clarity for insight. Okay. It's got a bit of material here. Like I said, it's a long chapter. The next phase then goes on to insight during sitting meditation. So there's the flip side. The first one was trying to bring about that calmness. Now the second part is to bring about insight during sitting meditation. So what do we have here? The first one, so this got two parts as well. The first part is called counteractive insight. It is exemplified by the contemplation of impurity aimed at counteracting desire, the contemplation involving the mind of loving kindness aimed at counteracting hatred, the contemplation involving analysis of the sense realms aimed at counteracting attachment to a self, and the breath counting contemplation aimed at counteracting excessive discursive thinking. Now these will not be discussed in detail here, but I want to talk about these in detail. I think this is quite important, and it's quite important to kind of learn a bit about this, I think, early on in your practice. So the term here is this idea of you translate it as counteraction. In Chinese, it's 对峙, and sometimes this also gets translated as like a counter agent, or even like a remedy for a specific problem. So elsewhere, this is talked about through the metaphor of really what you can call like a medical analogy, that for specific medical problems, there are specific medicines for those problems. Now, classic texts, because they're Indian, they use the kind of Ayurvedic system whereby illness is based on the three humours within the body, bile, phlegm, and wind, and then each of these three different imbalances brings about different types of problems, and then each of these three, so like when one of them is too strong, for example, will bring about a certain problem. And then if one of them is too strong, then you use a certain type of medicine, might be some type of herb or something like that, in order to bring that down and then remove that problem. And then a key part of this is, so the first part is, of course, making sure you have the right medicine for that problem. And then, of course, the flip side of that is, if you've got a certain problem and you take the wrong medicine, not only will it not help it, it might actually make it worse. Now, this is why I think this is quite a key concept, because it's related to like, what actual kind of meditation practice should I do? You know, I think in modern times with Buddhist and mainly Buddhist, but also some other forms of Asian religion meditation practice are becoming more and more popular in the general sphere, and then more and more studies are being done, scientific studies, and I really commend this. I think this is really great, but I often find that one of the biggest problems is the studies will talk about like, oh, we had people meditate, and then we went to measure and see what kinds of responses they have. Did they get karma or whatever? And then they just talk about like there's just this one thing called meditation, whereas the tradition is about so many different types of meditation, and each meditation is known to have different effects. So, you know, sometimes, you know, you hear some study and then we had people do some kind of meditation, but it didn't make them any calmer. And I think like, well, what kind of meditation did they have them do? It didn't explain. Now, it's not to say all the studies have this problem. Some studies do a much better job, and are really quite specific. That like, okay, they use one particular meditation technique, and then they might measure different elements that show different states of the meditator's mind, and then they might try another technique and do the same measurements, and another technique, do the same measurements. And they see certain types of technique might bring about really strong responses in some area of the mind, but not in others, right? And this is very much kind of like what we're dealing with here. So what are those? Let's just go back and have a look at them again. The first one, contemplation of impurity to counteract desire, and we can kind of pair that with the contemplation of love and kindness to counteract hatred. Now, these two are kind of like the two biggies of, you know, Buddhist mental affliction, right? You've got craving, aversion, and of course ignorance. Let's just set aside ignorance because that's more of a cognitive thing. Craving and aversion are very much kind of emotional things. They are emotional responses to different objects, and in general it is when we encounter pleasant objects. Well, really we shouldn't even say pleasant objects. Objects aren't pleasant or unpleasant. When we encounter objects that, for whatever reason, bring about a feeling of pleasure within ourselves, so the actual pleasure comes from ourselves, it doesn't actually come from the object. The object is like a stimulus for it, but the sense of pleasure comes from internally, depending on our own conditioning. When it's pleasant, the most likely reaction is to respond then with craving and attachment. Now, when we have the reverse, we encounter some object, and internally we have a response which is painful, then the most common thing that happens next is, of course, then aversion or hatred on a deeper level. So these two are like very similar in a way. Encounter some object, see something, hear something, smell something, taste, touch, whatever. Pleasant feeling, then we have craving. Or smell, hear, taste, touch, see, whatever, and it's unpleasant, and then we respond with aversion. And so different people will tend to be one, maybe more of one or more of the other. Some people really, just like things are like. Everything's like, oh, I like this, and oh, I like that. Very easy for them to have these pleasant feelings, which might kind of seem nice because like they always, wherever they go, things seem like good and pleasant, make them happy. But then problem in that, likely to have some really stubborn kind of attachment there. So what do we do then? If that's the kind of situation that we're in, that we are often in that situation ourselves, then this contemplation on impurity. Now, usually the way this particular practice is talked about is kind of in a narrow sense. So in Chinese it's called Bujingguan. Ashubha is the term in Sanskrit. And it's usually described as being these contemplations on, it's literally on a dead body, and then a dead body that starts to rot. Now, this is quite specifically for, two things. One, for clinging and attachment to the physical body. So this is like obviously a really deep-seated kind of attachment that we have. We tend to find other human bodies attractive, and particularly in sexual desire. So this was really, in the Buddhist time, only taught for the monastics because it just, the celibate lifestyle and overcoming that kind of desire as a whole, that was not at all expected of lay practitioners, and I think we need to also be clear about that. But if we take it in a more general sense, and so we might want to think about it in an even more general sense, and another example is like craving for food. So, have some food, it looks pleasant, it smells nice, it tastes nice, we take photos of it, we post them up on our Facebook page or our Instagram or something, and the more we interact with it in this way, of course, like the more pleasure we get, but also the deeper the craving. But then we can also do a kind of like impurity contemplation on the food itself. So you can kind of reflect, the basic principle is reflect on the negative side of it. So I make a joke, it's a bit of a gross kind of a joke, but I think you can get the point. Have this pleasant food, you want to take photos of the pleasant food, share the photos of the pleasant food. Okay, that's the food before it goes in. While we're eating it, and we're all chewing it up here, while it then goes down into our body and it's being digested in our stomach and the rest of our digestive system, doesn't look so nice. If we vomit up the food, of course we think it's absolutely disgusting, even though of course that same vomited food was just sitting in our own stomachs a few minutes ago. Somehow that's okay. It's kind of weird. Food only looks and appeals to us when we haven't eaten it yet. But of course when we haven't eaten it, it doesn't do anything for us. And of course once it comes out the other end, you don't see people, taking photos of, their delicious meal 24 hours later. In fact, that would be considered completely gross, and, people would be totally grossed out by that. But, these parts come together. We can also think of the other aspects as well. Overeating, is it good for our health, and so on and so forth. So the point is, it's that kind of craving state of mind only focuses on certain aspects of those objects. It doesn't focus on the entirety of the object. If you want to counter it, you need to emphasize the other side. By emphasizing the other side, we can come to a balance whereby we then just look at food as something like, well, yeah, it looks attractive and it's pleasant and whatever, and our bodies need it, but ultimately it just gets turned into this kind of, I don't even know what you call it when the food is in your stomach and then it gets pooped out the other side, where it's really quite disgusting and gross. And that's just all part of that process. And we can kind of look at it in a more objective manner. And that's what we're trying to do. So the contemplation on impurity isn't to kind of then have us focus about excrement and be there's some technical word for that. I can't quite scatophilia or something disgusting. I think it's some psychological term. It's not to end up like that either. It's just to come to this kind of emotionally neutral but quite objective and clear about what that is, be it food or about our bodies or about anything that we're attached to. The other one, of course, is what was the other one? The other one was like loving kindness, same thing. So when we have hatred and aversion to something or someone, we're tending to focus on the negative side, the painful side of it. The way to balance that is to focus on the good side of it. And so, even if we have issues with other people, other people do have some good side to them. If we are engaging them with that person in a way whereby our own hatred is starting to take over, that's going to distort our own understanding, and it's also going to mean that we're not happy either. You need to also be able to flip around and see the good side, that nice side, or even if you can't, you need to be able to see that in general people act in negative modes of behaviour because they themselves are usually quite troubled as well. It usually takes quite a troubled and insecure people. People that are suffering a lot of pain tend to be the ones that then also respond and act in ways that hurt other people. So you can kind of have that kind of compassion. Even if you can't do that, we need to see myself having hatred or aversion to them is not doing anything for me, right? Why should I let this other person's nasty behaviour make me also suffer? You don't have to. You can practice loving kindness and compassion for other people, but you can also practice it towards other people for yourself. And don't think that is necessarily some kind of like selfish thing. Okay, getting ourselves to a state of mind where we're free from afflictions should be seen as selfish, right? If everyone did that, the whole world would be a much better place. Now there's another couple in here as well that are mentioned. The analysis of the sense realms to counteract attachment to a self. It sounds a bit abstruse. What this basically means is, like often a sense of self, so like kind of like a strong ego, is often kind of based on this idea that kind of I am different and I'm special, I'm better than other people, for example. And we do this usually by accentuating certain elements of myself. It might be parts of my personality, parts of my physical body, accomplishments I've done, possessions I own. I am far more beautiful and rich and intelligent and talented than that person over there. Now that is going to bring in a lot of ego into that kind of state, right? So we tend to then focus on the differences, but of course even then we tend to focus on the differences that make us look better. You do need to keep in mind though that when Buddhism talks about this kind of ego or conceit, usually in English when we talk about conceit we're talking about the sense of feeling superior to other people. But even the sense of feeling inferior to other people is still based on a sense of self, right? Even if I think, oh, I'm just the worst at everything and everyone else is better than me, I'm inferior, it's still based on the sense of me. And again, that still tends to be based on, I will focus on certain things, those certain things where I am inferior to other people. So the core problem isn't just, you don't deal with this by just trying to be humble. Being humble is still based on a sense of self. But you really got to break it down and look like, okay, a so-called person. Okay, so I'm going to compare myself to someone, again, can be a bit outrageous here. Okay, the Dalai Lama as a incredibly highly respected spiritual cultivator and someone whose wisdom and compassion is something that we can all look up to and admire and aspire to. Okay, but let's keep in mind one thing. Okay, let's just break it down. Who is the Dalai Lama and who is me? Okay, Dalai Lama has 2 eyes. I have 2 eyes. He has 1 nose. I have 1 nose. He has 2 ears. I have 2 ears. He has skin, hair, He's a monk and he shaved his head. Still got some hair. He has blood and all these other parts that make up his physical body, and so do I. I also have a small amount of hair, skin, bones, blood, whatever. The Dalai Lama eats food, he goes to the bathroom and he sleeps. And look, so do I. I eat food, I go to the bathroom, and I also sleep. I think thoughts, I have emotions, I want to be happy and I don't want to suffer. He also thinks thoughts, has emotions, wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. Look, in all these ways, I am just the same as the Dalai Lama. Wow. Now, I know it's a bit of a funny example. Any people might think, oh my goodness, Matt, he's sitting there comparing himself to the Dalai Lama. Now, you do this, like this is a counter agent, it's a counteraction against a certain situation. If we think we're superior to some poor homeless person sleeping in the street, remember these same things. That person, 2 arms, 2 legs. Me, 2 arms, 2 legs. That person wants to be happy, doesn't want to suffer. I also want to be happy, I don't want to suffer. Hey look, me and that person, we're really pretty much the same, you know. I don't have that much whereby I can then say I'm superior to that person, I'm better than that person. And that is a way, so you actually break down what do we mean by a person, by an individual, by me, a self, in order to overcome this kind of conceit and arrogance. That's the principle there. And then the last one, breath meditation to counteract excessive discursive thinking, right? So the idea here being that we think a lot, right? The monkey mind is thinking about this, it's thinking about that, it's thinking about everything else. We need to kind of calm that down, and breath meditation is one of the best practices for that. And I'd personally also, I think that in the modern time, in modern society, mainly due to our jobs, not so much society, but due to our jobs that we have, you know, classical teachings on meditation were mainly for monastics. Monastic life in the Buddhist time, probably a fair bit simpler than monastic life now. But even for lay people, probably most people are farmers or tradespeople. It's physical work, you're working your body. You might have a lot of hand-eye coordination type things. But I think in ancient times they didn't have anywhere near as much thinking in their jobs that we do. You know, just like open up your planner, your daily, weekly, monthly planner, and all those things. All the things you have to do online, constantly writing emails, filling out reports, filling in spreadsheets, data-driven work that we have to do and reporting on these things. It's a lot of thinking, a huge amount of thinking. And then it's really difficult when we finish our jobs to turn off that thinking. Which is quite different from if you're just a very like manual labor. You might not have to think so much. A lot of your job is, you know, just working with your body. And so, because I think more modern day people have this issue of excessive discursive thinking, so discursive, you know, thinking with words and concepts. Therefore, this meditation on the breath is like really suitable for a lot of people in modern society. Okay, now up to this point, I don't know if we've really fully covered this whole chapter here. We've still got a bit to go. Like I said, it's a long chapter, and I didn't think we'd be finishing it all off anyway. So, however, on time, it's time for us to do some stretches and do some sitting meditation. So, I hope you're still with us. Okay, I see Hanuman has joined us there as well. Good to see you. Hope your morning's going well. Okay, it's time. We've been sitting for a while. It's time to do some stretches and then do some sitting meditation. Okay, now I need to flip the camera. Push this camera down and flip the camera at the back. Okay. Right. Okay. Oh, I feel I've been sitting too long this morning. Okay, so let's just start with our usual ones. Ankles, knees, hips and waist, of course. Then the upper body, the chest and the shoulders, head and neck. Okay, so I think you kind of know how we do these stretches now, so I won't talk too much about it, but just remember, when you're stretching each body part, put your mental focus into that body part, and that will help with your concentration. So first with the right foot, rolling at the ankle, other way, okay, left foot, rolling at the ankle. I hope you can actually join me for these stretches. I don't know where you are watching this live stream. Okay, back the other way. I hope you do have some space. Okay, that's the ankles. Now on to the knees. So hands on your knees and squatting down. Back up, stretching the backs of the legs, and down, and back, and down, and back. And then do circles with the knees. Put your focus into your knees. Back the other way. Okay, coming up. Then up to the hips and waist, so hands on your hips, feet apart, and doing circles. Back the other way. Okay. Then we're going to go to kind of the upper body, both the spine, but also opening up the chest, and we're going to coordinate this with our breath, remember. Hands together, and then inhaling up, and then exhaling down. Inhaling up. Exhaling down. Inhaling up. Exhaling down. Inhaling up, last time. And exhale. Okay, so hopefully that will kind of open up your chest a bit and also start to deepen your breath. Go the head up and down, stretching up under the throat, down the back of the neck, up, and down, up, and down. Center, left, and right. Left. And right. One more time. Okay. Let's just relax arms, legs. Okay. Okay. Grab your cushion. And let's get ready for our sitting session. Okay. So just check out your posture, what posture you want to use. I'm going to go for my good old half lotus. My one leg tucked underneath, my other foot on top. Find it's nice and comfy for me. As I said, I like to twist a bit. This helps to get my lower back in place, side to side. You can stretch forward, breathing out. Breathing up, come over the knees on either side. Can you do a few stretches up like this as well? Good to just open up the chest before you start to do any breathing meditation. Okay. Let me get the little bell bowl ready. Okay. And just even before we hit the bell, the signal, just kind of reflect for a moment on your state of mind this morning. So we already talked last week about, for example, using the breath, but do we focus on the breath at the nostrils or at the abdomen, depending on our state of mind? And while I think we should continue with meditation on the breath, we've also talked a little bit today about, say for example, just going straight into a calming practice, say the breath, or sometimes we can actually use a contemplation to also bring about the state of calm if there's something that our mind is kind of like really stuck on and we can't get it out of our head. We need to reflect on that in certain ways in order to kind of like basically say, okay, look, just time to, that's not the most important thing to think about, right? Time to let it go and come back to the breath so we can develop some deeper calm. So we can also maybe use that contemplation there to get the result of calming that we're looking for. So just going to reflect for a moment on how you are today. To kind of work out how you're going to start your session. And of course, how we start the session is one thing. And as we go through the session, we also need to be constantly spending a little bit of attention, like on self-reflection. So what I mean is, if you're focusing on the breath, it's not 100% of your focus on the breath. It's like 95% of your focus on the breath and 5% of focus on the focus and the mind itself. Right? How good's my quality of focus? Is my focus clear? Is my focus a bit too tense? Is it a bit too soft and soggy, like I'm going to go to sleep? Right? So you also do need to spend a little bit of time reflecting back on the mind, which is contemplating itself, in order to make adjustments. Right? Very important point. And that balance, of course, takes some practice. Okay, enough talk. Let's get ready for our session. once you've settled on your basic approach, for example, at what point you wish to focus on your breath, just gently settle your attention there. And as you contemplate also, if the mind gets distracted, as soon as you are aware of the distraction, bring your attention back to that point of focus. If you're finding that it's very difficult to settle your mind on a single point because of too many thoughts going on, you can use the approach of contemplating and reflecting upon whatever it is on your mind, seeing it as permanent, dissatisfactory, conditioned, and therefore beyond our control, in order to enable ourselves to let that go, at least let it go enough to be able to settle the mind on your object of focus. setting. Keep an eye out for those two problems of floating and sinking. Particular sinking because that drowsy dullness also means it's difficult to even be aware of our own drowsy dullness. But of course the floating, the overexcited mind is also very difficult to calm. Or you can reposition your point of focus, for example at the nostrils or the lower abdomen, in order to treat those two issues if you need to. adjustments that we have been talking about. Just gotta try to find that nice, even balance. Bring about a calm, clear state of mind. Now, if we are in a situation where that state can be nicely maintained, then we shouldn't just make changes for the sake of it. So don't just start moving your point of focus, for example, if everything is okay. Make adjustments where needed, and if not needed, then do not make adjustments. Take a nice deep full breath in. Slowly exhale all the way out. Rock your upper body left and right. Slowly transition a very calm state of sitting meditation to an active state. Breathe in, stretch up. Breathe out as we lean forward. Inhale. Exhale over the left leg. Inhale. Exhale over the right leg. Roll the shoulders, stretch the neck. Warm up the palms. Massage around the eyes, forehead and temples, cheeks and chin. Pull on the ears, earlobes. Back of the neck, shoulders and arms. Chest, abdomen, and the lower back. Okay. And slowly unfold your legs. If you need to, massage the sides of the legs, the front, twist the ankle, change. If your legs are still numb or uncomfortable, just wait, don't be in a rush, let them get back their sense of movement and feeling before you get up and start to move. Okay, I'm just going to come forward on my seat here. Flip cameras back. Okay, So we're coming to the end of our session here today. So we've got a few more minutes left at the end, so if you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask, sorry, I need to move, camera needs to come up a bit higher there. Okay, so if you have any questions or thoughts or comments or something you'd like to ask or know or share, now's the time to do so. And while you're thinking of that, maybe while you're typing that, just a reminder, so today is week 7, and then next week's week 8, and that's going to be our last class of this series. So we have the question, what do we do next? I think I'd like to continue doing these classes like a live stream, partly because I'm finally getting the hang of how to do the technical side, but I think it's definitely a really good way for different people and different places and different time zones. So we've got a couple of questions. The big question, of course, is like, what topic shall we do? So we had a little bit of feedback on that last time. I think we mentioned like interest in Satipatthana, so the grounds of mindfulness or the foundations of mindfulness. So it's a definite possibility. So just in that area, do you want more meditation classes? Would you like to just do pretty much straight up meditation? We can do that. We could do it a bit like this, where we maybe look at a particular text, kind of read the text, talk about the text, and then we do the practice. Or would you just prefer to just meditation? I give some straight out oral instructions and we just meditate. We can do that too. On the technical side, it's a bit easier, and it also means we don't just have to follow the particular text. There's so many different aspects and different teachings, we can just bring them all in together into those classes. Or would you rather something that's a bit more general, kind of daily Buddhist practice, which can include things from, just like a good way, shall we say, a good, wholesome, intelligent and wise ways of dealing with issues in life. That is also, I think, a really good one and an important one as well. It's a bit more general than meditation, but sometimes, we might spend a little bit of time each day meditating, but we spend many more hours just doing our other things, interacting with people, interacting with the rest of the world. So that's another definite possible topic that we can do. So your thoughts on that? We can talk about that, what we're going to do next. And then another question is also like when we're going to do it. So I've chosen this particular time zone. Okay, we've got a comment here. At the beginning, you were talking about the difference between wisdom and faith-based devotees. I wonder if there was a particular specific sutra or text you were referring to that talks more about this. I'd be interested in seeking it out. Okay, yes, there are specific texts that talk about it. I can't think of the name. I kind of know where it is, but it will take me a few minutes to pick it out. So maybe, how about if I go find that, I can find it like after class. I'll put it in here and I'll tag you. How about that? I'll see if there's some online links. If there's no online links, I'll just try to put in like good clear information so you can like track that down yourself. How does that sound, Elena? Okay, and then from Jay Lee, thank you, we're looking forward to the next series of classes. Okay, I'm good to hear, I'm glad to hear that, and same from others. But what do you want to do? You want to just do meditation? Or you want to do text reading? You want to do more general Buddhism? I mean, another way is we can just do a real just Buddhism, like Buddhism A to Z, and we just talk about from the basics and we just slowly work our way through. I've done a lot of classes like that in Chinese, kind of like at undergrad level, like first year undergrad. It's like basically like Introduction to Buddhism. But I've very seldom done that in English, actually, for a number of reasons. But that's the sort of thing that can go on, like, not, we can do it short, we could do 8 weeks, but that's the sort of thing that you could do a class a week for a year, and sort of, you know, and still have things that we haven't touched on. So please let me know what, you know, kind of more specifically what you'd like to see. Okay, so the other thing I was going to say, like time. So I've kind of picked this particular time zone. It's morning, Saturday morning in Taiwan. It's not super early, it's just 9 o'clock. It works for other people like in this area, say Philippines, if people are in China or in Hong Kong, it'll work. If we go further west of here, then it's going to be like super early in the morning. One of the drawbacks is it means those in Europe, it's like 2 in the morning or something crazy like that, 3 in the morning. Now I'm saying this, of course, I don't know how many people in Europe, like probably none, are listening to this live. Maybe somebody might read about it later on, or watch these like after the fact. So give some comments. But then it also means that those, say Australia and New Zealand, it's kind of midday or early afternoon, and then in the US West Coast, it's probably like evening. Central and East Coast, it's probably late on a Friday night. So just like, you know, if you want to let me know what time you want, and not just what like time, tell me what time zone you're in, what time is good for you, and also what day. See, this is kind of a mainly like a Saturday morning, Friday night type of thing. Does that work, or would you just prefer something else? Yeah, I think I might actually put this out as like a little poll or something on the Bodhi Tree Buddhism Community page. Maybe tag a few of you regulars, and then maybe you can like pick some time slot and some general topic, and we can work about it from there. I'll probably have might have a couple of weeks break after week 8. And then just get kind of back into it again. I don't want to break for too long. Between the last set of classes, which were online, and then these ones now, yeah, the timing was pretty terrible. It ended up being like literally a couple of months without any classes. And a little break's kind of nice, but not too long. Just maybe a couple of weeks. And in that time, I might drag up some other old material that I've got sitting around, dust it off, and also upload that to the Bodhi Tree page. So there will be some new content on the page, but it won't be like actually classes that I've only recently recorded. Okay. Anything else from anyone else? I hope your morning has gone well. I hope your evening has gone well. If you've been listening to it in the evening, those of you out there in California land, I hope it lets you relax and let go of your stresses of the week, and it can let you have a really nice, good night's sleep. And so when you wake up on Saturday morning, you're feeling lovely and refreshed and clear, and then you've got a whole great weekend ahead of you, and you can have a really good weekend and enjoy your time doing whatever it is that you want to do. For those of you that are tuning in on a Saturday morning, I hope it's put a nice start to your Saturday, so you've got a good clear mind, so that you can then go about doing the things that you're going to do for the rest of the day. Okay, comment from Tim there. This was great, thanks. Okay, you're welcome, Tim. It's always good to have you join us. Elena says, this has been a really good time for us on the West Coast in terms of content, being interested in Buddhist history stuff, development, Buddhist philosophy over time. But I have been told I am a nerd, so take my advice with a grain of salt. Well, you know, you're a nerd. I'm a nerd too. We're a bunch of Dharma geeks. That's not always a bad thing. I think there's, you know, the person who's just posted ahead of you is also a bit of a Buddhist nerd as well. So, thanks for letting me know though. That is important. You know, I think it's possible to kind of talk about different Buddhist thought and development over time. So you kind of structure the whole thing in like a history. You start from the basic ideas and work the way through. but it's not kind of like a history class. It really is talking about the ideas, and we can talk about, you know, what are the core ideas and teachings and practices of early Buddhism, how did then these develop over time and so forth. And it can all be fairly practical stuff, if you know what I mean. It doesn't just have to be purely theoretical. Okay, and last comment there, Janice from Kalyana Meditation Center, the Satipatthana suggestion was from us. Yes, I do recall that from last week. So, okay, that's good. Okay, we've got a couple of good different threads going there. Thank you for letting me know. As for now, the time is 1:32, so I think it's about time to wrap up the class. Thank you everyone for joining me and joining us all, and I hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay happy, stay good. Okay, signing out.